I struggled with what should I be doing versus what do I want to be doing. So I kept changing jobs. People kept hiring me because my resume made it look like I was a good hire. I wasn't a good hire. Frankly, I got called into the office and they said, either you're going to commit to us long term, which is what you should do because you don't have the skills to go do this on your own, or you need to resign today. So I said I resign. And that was really, in that case, the push that I needed to get out there and start. If I were to ask a business owner, what are your rules around money? They would say, I don't know. I don't really have rules around it or principles that I use for decision making, other than, again, have as much as possible. That is the root cause of why I believe 82% of small business owners go out of business because of cash flow problems.
Hi, Dan. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being here. Welcome to Peak Performance Perspectives, where we help help entrepreneurs master health, wealth, and relationships. I must start by asking you, what does peak performance mean to you?
Yeah, I love that question. And what immediately comes to mind to me is living the life that you want on your terms, as little compromise as possible. And if you're doing that, you're operating at a peak level.
So many of us want to do that. We want to have the freedom to do what we want. We want to have the freedom to pursue the passions. But many of us don't have an opportunity to do that. And years go by and it just would have, should have, right? So if somebody's listening to this and they're like, yes, I want to do that, what would Dan say are just first couple of steps can take towards that journey?
Yeah, I think at some point today we might talk about a concept I call the solvable problem, and that's a big part of it. So we'll get to that piece. I think the easiest first step you can do is write down, if I were retired, what would my life look like? Because so many of us are working towards this ideal outcome and it's years from now. And you'd say, if I were retired, I'd exercise more, I'd hang out with friends, travel more, I say read more. It's like you list out these things. And it's my belief that when someone writes that down and they get very specific, that typically about 80% of that is accomplishable in the next 12 months. You just have to be very intentional about it. You want to read more, I make that happen. If you want to have better fitness, better relationships, probably make those things happen and get pretty close to your ideal life. If you write it down and get clear, the things that are more challenging are the really time intensive, like traveling. If one of your goals is you want to travel 6 months out of the year and you got kids that are in school, like that one, you might have to put on hold for a bit. But I do believe that 80% roughly of what you would want to have in your sort of idealized retirement, you can do in the next 12 months.
If I'm playing devil's advocate and I'm one of those listeners, I'm saying, Dan, I would love to do that. The minutia of life gets into the way. How am I going to find time to do all the fitness and this and that and pursue my passion, start my business? How do you solve the time problem?
Yeah, it's such a great question because that is the number one thing that people push back on is simply that it's time. And I really believe strongly it's one of the core perspectives, building blocks of the way that I think is this quote from W. Edwards Deming. And it says, and I'm paraphrasing, every system is perfectly designed for the results it's getting. In other words, you've designed a life currently that guarantees that you're not able to do the things that you want. You don't have the time that you want. And so it's a systems problem more than anything. And so we have three choices if you buy into this narrative. Number one, it's the path of least resistance. It's really the underpinnings of the question in of itself, which is what I might describe as victim mindset, which is, for me, I'm never going to be able to do this. It's not possible. There's too many things working against me. And that's basically accepting the current state. There's another quote from Virginia that says, most people prefer the certainty of misery over the misery of uncertainty. And so we'll stay in these bad relationships, these bad paradigms, because it's more certain. So that's the first option. But if you actually want to live the life that you want, there are two others: change the system or change your behavior. Now, changing a system is something that takes a really long period of time. If you have a really short-term goal, usually you got to change your behavior to get there. If time is the primary hurdle, I'm first going to push back and say, is it really time or is it energy? Because I rewind back to 2020, January 2020. I would ask my clients, what is your number one goal? And any of them that had kids said, I want more time with my kids. And then February, March 2020, what happened? COVID. Now we had forced on ourselves a lot of time with our kids. Then what everyone was saying, can we please get our kids back in school? I'm losing my mind. So what it shined a light on was, it wasn't necessarily that people wanted more time with their kids. They want to be more present when they're around their kids. That's an energy problem. So we got to figure out, what is the real issue? Do you not have enough energy to wake up a little bit earlier, and exercise, or stay up a little bit later, or do you not have enough energy to feel excited about saying yes to meeting up with friends? That's probably the problem that needs to be solved, is why do you not have enough energy, not time? Those are a couple thoughts that come to mind.
I love how you put it. And you're right. COVID solved so many of those, answered so many of those questions, right? I want to spend more time with my family. I wish I had more time at home so I could work on a side passion project. All that time came, months came, but nobody was able to do any of that. Henceforth, proving what you just said, it's not a time problem. Sometimes it is the energy problem, both physical energy and emotional energy. Your firm, Nth Degree CPAs, focuses on helping small business owners optimize their financial strategies. What inspired you to start this firm back in 2008? What was your vision when you were just starting out?
The pre-framing to all of that is that I've been an entrepreneur since birth. That's been my identity, and always scheming on business ideas, and ended up going off to business school and getting an accounting degree and an information systems degree because I thought the combination of the two would be the best skill set to be an entrepreneur. And then I went as far away from entrepreneurship as you can go, which is I did a fellowship at the board that writes all the US accounting standards. It would be the equivalent of clerking for the Supreme Court, as the closest parallel in the accounting world. So that put me on this whole other trajectory that I struggled with for a while. First in my family to go to college, making more than my parents ever have, working 70, 80, 90 hours a week, often 7 days a week. So I struggled with what should I be doing versus what do I want to be doing. So I kept changing jobs. People kept hiring me because my resume made it look like I was a good hire. I wasn't a good hire, frankly, because I should have been self-employed. And finally, I realized in 2008, there was an opportunity to do something different in the accounting and finance space that would allow me to really jump on my entrepreneurial desires and leverage the skills that I had. And that opportunity was forced on me. So I had kept putting it off, and I had a plan of when I was going to do it. And I had a person, a colleague, and we were talking about collaborating together. He ended up handing out some business cards at an event that got back to the founders of, or CEO of the company that we were at. He got terminated. I got called into the office, and they said, either you're going to commit to us long term, which is what you should do because you don't have the skills to go do this on your own, or you need to resign today. So I said I resign. And that was really, in that case, the push that I needed to get out there and start really helping business owners unlearn a lot of the false narratives that are out there about how to grow a small business, which is what truly, that last piece is what I'm truly passionate about.
In a parallel universe where the business cards were handed out and the people running the company didn't find out about it, would you still have become?
Would like to believe yes. And I was working towards that and building up a savings on the side and some clients that didn't compete with the clients of that firm. I would like to say yes. But at that point in my life, 15 years ago, I really struggled with being a people pleaser and this, like being a good child. Familiar with that of what am I supposed to be doing? And I'm supposed to be having a stable income and taking care of my family. And so I would like to say yes, but the honest answer is maybe not.
Thank you for your honesty, because almost always young entrepreneurs look at successful entrepreneurs like yourself and they think that this person must have just been born with a surge of confidence to be able to deep dive and build this thing up. But often always that's not the story. Part you talked about being a people pleaser and not wanting to get in trouble because you're supposed to be the good child. These are problems that everybody faces. It's just some people have to muster up the courage and do something about it, and some people just can't. So thank you for your honesty with that. You were recognized as top 40 under 40 accountant globally, not 1, 2, 3, 4 times. What do you believe sets you apart in the world of finance and accounting from dozens and scores of other people trying to do the same thing?
When I started the firm back in 2008, the overarching narrative was I wanted to be unconventional. And it's a contradiction to say unconventional accountant, because accountants are like the definition of conventions. This doesn't make any sense when you put those two words together. But I have a little bit of an identity crisis because while I know a lot about accounting, like I said, I helped write an accounting standard, arguably still the most complex accounting standard, not one of the top couple of accounting standards. I know a lot about that. I don't consider myself to be an accountant. I consider myself to be an entrepreneur who knows about accounting, finance, tax, a little bit of legal, a fair amount about investing. So I'm coming at it from the point of view of the client, their experience, what they want to have happen. And what they want to have happen is live the life of their dreams, back to peak performance. I call it certainty with peak performance. They want to live the life they've made that they're meant to have on their terms without compromise. And so we've been developing a number of different methodologies, intellectual property to work with our clients to help them achieve this life on their terms. Because I believe the biggest risk in life is not living the life that you want. And so I think that's what's set us apart is we're not just so domain dependent on we do your taxes, we do your books. We do those things as part of a broader picture of funding the life that they want. That is a more difficult job to take on. It's more difficult to hire people that want to do that. But when clients come on and they experience the difference, it's notable for them.
The life that I may want when I sign up with you as a client is also dependent on the mistakes I've made in the past, because our mistakes sometimes control our present, which can sometimes affect our future. In your experience working with small business owners, what are some of the most common financial mistakes they make? And if I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, okay, I want to avoid them, how do I go about avoiding them?
At the very highest level, if I were to ask a business owner, what are your rules around money? They would either say, have as much of it as possible, or I don't know. Now, the first option, have as much of it as possible, is not a rule. That's an outcome. And both answers are roughly the same thing, which is, I don't know. I don't really have rules around it or principles that I use for decision making, other than, again, have as much as possible. That is the root cause of why I believe 82% of small business owners go out of business, because of cash flow problems. In my world, in the finance world, and in the first part of my career, that accounting standard I worked on was a derivatives and hedge accounting standard. And so the first part of my career was in capital markets, mostly with clients that had $100 billion or more in investable assets. So they had trading floors, large investment teams on staff, as well as Wall Street. And the difference between the top traders and everyone else was the top traders would understand their biases, and they would create structures and rules and principles around it to try to help them overcome those biases. So the absence of having the right rules in place often cause us to solve the same problem several different ways. Because it looks slightly different, we don't characterize it as the same problem. It causes us to be subject to loss aversion. A loss hurts 7 times more than an equivalent gain, so we'll work really hard to not have to recognize a loss. It'll cause us to be subject to ownership bias. We value things that we own more than something we don't, which makes sense, but sometimes we put too much value on ideas because they're our ideas and we own them. And we'll go down in a ball of flames because of this ownership bias. And I could give you many more, but we need to create these money rules, these principles to help ourselves not be subject to the biases so often, raise the floor in our decision making, as well as develop a investment thesis of sorts so we just know what to say no to, or better than saying no, because there's this whole thing, if you're not a hell yeah, it's a no. And I like that initially, but I think what is better is if it's not a hell yeah, it's a counteroffer. So I got a bunch of rules. That's my thesis of what deals I'm going to do. If it's not a no, because I have these rules, I come back with a counteroffer. This is what would need to be true for me to do this deal. Now, but the majority of the time, people are going to say no to that. But every once in a while, you get a yes, and that turns into a home run over time. So it all starts with the right principles, rules that lead into an investment thesis, and then compound day to day where we're removing a lot of the cognitive burden around our decision making.
As someone who truly cares about the clients you bring on and their success, sometimes we have the best ideas. We have thought it through. We have so many years of experience. We come to the client and we tell them this is something that they should look into. It's probably a good idea to do it because of XYZ reasons. But we are not our client. And they have different fears about risk and uncertainty, especially sometimes in unpredictable markets. How do you help your clients navigate around that?
The risk as the consultant always is you bring tactics to a strategy problem. So in this case, I think to some extent what we're talking about is they have a certain strategy, how they want to invest, and we're not aligned. We're bringing tactics that fall outside of what they're going to be comfortable with strategically. So you can't solve a strategy problem with tactics. Many consultants are failing right now because they just bring tactics to the table that don't fit into a broader strategy. One of the ways that I try to reach alignment with clients and understand what their strategic approach is something I developed called the 5 wealth types. We're typically told we're either a saver or a spender. Saver or spender. Although one person, if you study their behaviors, might generally save, but man, if this dream that they've had shows up and they can buy it, they're on it. So save or spender is too much of an overgeneralization. So based off my research and working with thousands of clients over 15 years, developed these 5 wealth types. There's hustlers, gamblers, optimizers, savers, and outsourcers. Now, you can have a little bit of each one of those, but typically someone is really heavy in one area. For example, the hustler, they bias effort. So they're going to assume that effort is going to be the answer to solving their problems. The outsourcer, on the other end of the spectrum, they bias somebody else's opinion and they want experts. They want someone to tell them what to do next. To be able to meet someone at their individual point of need, we need to figure out where they fit into that range of wealth types and know, okay, this is going to be their strategy, how they're going to view things. Sometimes that's going to give them a lot of upside. Sometimes it's going to limit what they're willing to do. We got to build systems again around their tendencies, play to their strengths, try to hedge the potential weaknesses.
You wrote a book called Reading the Game. It was celebrated by USA Today and Wall Street Journal. It was bestseller on both those platforms. What was the motivation behind writing this book when there are so many other financial books?
To differentiate myself because it isn't a finance book. It's about financial certainty, but I'm not teaching financial literacy per se in the book. I'm teaching about decision making, and I have a different point of view around it, which comes back to that notion that the biggest risk in life is not living the life that you want and helping people get clarity on what they really want, what I call a solvable problem, and then helping them understand that we get oftentimes by social media, some business coaches, otherwise, they're telling you there's only one way to do this. There's no evidence to support that there's only one way to have success in business. We're told that we have to be someone that we're not. There's a mountain of evidence that supports that you have more success when you lean into your uniqueness than if you try to be someone that you're not. We're told to take a ton of risk and always bet on ourselves. But when we study the people who do extraordinary things, they take risk, but calculated risk, and the bets they make have exponentially more upside than downside. So most of us don't understand risk correctly. So I'm trying to dispel a lot of these misnomers that cause us to go out of business, not live the life that we want, and then give an alternate point of view about how you can design a business and life on your terms. And I hadn't seen anything out there like that.
Solvable problem. It's not only a great concept, because I've read it, but the title, the phrase itself is very intriguing because at a very grassroots level, sometimes we do take action or do not take action because of our belief system about how solvable the problem is. We have both been on a fitness journey where we looked at ourselves and we said we want to be a better version of ourselves. We believed it to be a solvable problem, and hence we devised tactics and methodologies and strategies followed with it. At a grassroots level, when I'm looking at my life, or when a listener is looking at their life, and they are having trouble deciding what is even a solvable problem and not, even at that very basic level, how does one get started with that process?
Step one is to try to isolate some universal truths versus preferences. So in the financial side of things, let me step back and explain why that's the case. So if you just ask somebody, what are your goals? What are your financial goals? What are your health goals? What are your life goals? Most people get more anxiety from that. You create more uncertainty from them than not, because they may not feel like they have the right answer to give you. It's got to be a right answer. You're going to judge me. I don't feel comfortable to give myself permission to truly give you the answer. I don't believe that it's possible for me to have what I want. There's all these reasons why someone gets a tremendous amount of anxiety around answering those questions. We need to start with some set of universal truth. In the finance world, I have never heard anyone push back when I ask them, when would you like to retire? How much debt do you have and when would you like to pay that off? How much would you like to have in an emergency fund? Those are all things that people are like, yeah, I understand that those are goals I should have. How much the goal is when I hit that timeline is personal and specific to them. It's a preference. But we can get some momentum because we want to go from 0 to 1. If I can find a universal truth, 0 to 1, then I will have momentum, because a 0 to 1 change is an infinite relative change, right? 1 minus 0 divided by 0, you get, if you've ever done that math before, you get infinity. Just 0 to 10, that's also an infinite relative change. So we usually try to go 0 to 10 instead of 0 to 1. We're not working out at all. Now we're going to go 7 days a week. We don't even have any data to present or support that we can go 1 day a week, but we're going to do 7, and then we're going to wonder why we burn out. So trying to come up with a couple of building blocks or one thing that we can do. I call it a micro step. What is the smallest thing that you can do to validate, give yourself information, and take the next step? and then get more information and take the next step. So come up with a couple of universal truths in the solvable problem. In the financial version of it, I call these three goals: financial security. If we can figure out what it's going to take for you to not have to work or retire, pay off your debt, and have an emergency fund. If you could do all those things, you'd say you have financial security. Now, your life may not feel fulfilled at this point because you have all these preferences. But let's tackle those later when you feel comfortable telling me your preferences. But let's at least have a starting point.
In your book, you talk a lot about making money on your own terms, which is something everybody wants to do. Part of the American dream, to not have a job, to do something on your own. But many struggle to do that. Many struggle to even get an idea going, let alone the next steps. If I'm listening to this, what would Dan say are some of the key steps, just beginner steps individuals can take towards this journey? Would it be the going from 0 to 1? Would it be something else?
Yeah, great question. And there's a bunch of things that come to mind in response to that question. There's a bunch of pieces to it. One is just struggling to come up with what would I do next? And we have been taught this fail to plan to fail narrative, right? So not only am I supposed to know what to do next, but I'm also supposed to have a plan for how I go about doing what's next, right? Have you felt that or heard that before? Those are incredibly overwhelming. I don't even know if I want to do this, and I need to come up with a plan. And mathematically, that is an incredibly flawed approach. Because if you put together a plan, every step in the plan that you add that doesn't have 100% probability of success reduces the overall probability of the plan working out. Step 1, 100% probability of success. Step 2, let's just say, this to be generous, has a 90% possibility of success. Well, 100 times 90, we're now at 90%. You have to multiply the probabilities of each step. If the next step has another 90%, we multiply those together, we get to 81% probability. When we get to the fourth step, what's the chance a fourth step in a process is close to 90%, probably 50%. Now we're at 40% probability of the plan working out the way that we expect. Mathematics is called system reliability. It's take all the components. Reliability, you multiply them together, tells you how reliable the system is. Anytime we're doing something new, almost every step is less than 50% likely to play out the way that you want. If there's 10 steps, 50% times 50%, 10 times, we're at less than 2% likelihood of the outcome. So we just designed a system that just guarantees we're going to get frustrated, shame ourselves, feel incredibly guilty, stall out, stop doing it. That's why I argue for micro steps. One step at a time. You can have a sketch of a plan. We're going to take one step, get data, have that inform the next step. I'm going to set rules in advance. The book, as an example. Let's give this as an example. I wasn't sure that I wanted to do. I'm a masochist at heart. I think we might have that in common a little bit. I like to do hard things, prove that I can do them to myself. It's a little bit, it can be a character flaw at times because of my need to sometimes just prove it too much. But the thing about a book is that most books don't sell more than 100 copies. And it is a massive undertaking to write a book. Hundreds of hours of time, maybe thousands of hours of time. And you're just, unless you're a natural writer, second guessing yourself, third guessing. It doesn't end. Anyone who's ever written a book will tell you the book is never finished. Every time you read it, you're like, I need to rewrite this. So the risk was, I'm going to spend hours and hours writing this. No one's going to buy it. No one's going to read it. So micro step. What's the smallest action I can take to validate that this is worth proceeding? Sent out at this point, I had a Facebook group, posted in the Facebook group. If I were to write this book, would anyone be interested in buying it? No checkout links or any of that, because that takes time to set up all these checkout links. And maybe I got to create an LLC if I don't already have a business, and bank accounts. You can get lost in all these details of stuff when you don't even know if someone's going to buy. The rule I set in advance was I need at least 50 people to say, yes, they want to buy this book. I think is what I said, 50 people. I got more than 50 responses. Next step was, okay, I'm going to set up a payment link. Because people vote with their money. I've learned this mistake many times where I got a big outcome for folks, went and built it all, and then you came back. And I like the concept of it, but now I got to pay money. I feel differently about it. Came back based off the number of responses and everything. Said, okay, I need 100 people to pre-order this book for this amount for me to take the next step. If there were less than 100, I was going to refund everyone. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I pre-sold about 5,000 copies of the book. And so at that point, I knew that I was going to get to USA Today and Wall Street Journal bestseller status, which then creates other benefits. So people are more willing to talk to you on a podcast or have you speak at an event or do these other things because you've got some credibility. But if at any time one of my rules was not met, That was the end of it. And that prevents me from spending a bunch of time on stuff and feeling crappy about it later because I'm just validating one step at a time. So that would be my recommendation.
If we go back to financial advice, just like fitness advice, everybody and their mother has an opinion. And the internet has given everybody a voice, but it also created a lot of confusion. On a diet side, is the carnivore diet the best? Is the low fat diet the best? Is the high fat diet the best? On the financial side, oh my God, it's even crazier, especially because now there's real money at stake. If I am someone who wants financial advice and I'm just lost amongst all these voices, what are some rules, key things that I should utilize to understand what is sound advice and what is just noise?
One of my commandments that I write about in my book is understanding the difference between preference versus binary. Preference is what you want. There's no right or wrong. You want it because you want it. People will spend a lot of time telling you why you're wrong, but it's a preference. Binary, zeros and ones. It's fact and fiction. Why is the sky blue? There's facts behind why this and science behind why the sky is blue. We can go and Google that or now ask ChatGPT. First off, we have to properly characterize the question that we're asking of, is this a preference? Or is this a right or wrong? Should I grow my business? May feel like a financial question, but it's also, there's a lot of preference in that because you don't even have to have a business to begin with. You could go get a job. Depends on a lot of your own personal priorities. Should I work with my spouse? Should I hire this employee? There's a financial element to it because I believe every business decision is a financial decision. Take it another step forward. You could even say every decision is a financial decision, but in business context, every decision is preference. If you go, should I hire an employee? We got to go back to what are you optimizing towards? What is your number one goal? If you told me my number one goal is time, we might go back to that energy discussion to figure out if that's really the number one thing. But if your number one priority truly was time, then you go, should I hire an employee? If you want more time in the short term, hiring an employee, probably not going to give you more time. Each direct report on average takes 5 hours a week of your own time to manage them effectively, and you got to get them trained. Should I bring on this client? You want more time? Maybe not. There might be another alternative way for us to get the outcome that you want. We might be able to re-engineer your cash flow or save you an equivalent amount of tax equal to what this employee might generate for you in profit, in which case it takes less time to save the money in tax and you don't have to manage this person. So we got to, underneath that preference is figuring out, okay, what are you really trying to accomplish? Now, if it is binary, right or wrong, let's look at the research. Where I'm different than most tax CPAs is I don't speculate. A lot of tax CPAs, they tell you their opinion. Sounds like fact. But like, I don't know, you probably pay this salary feels about right. Seems reasonable. What do the IRS audit manuals say? What do the court cases say? Do we have any legal opinions? Are there any private letter rulings? Let's get all the facts and make a decision based off the facts because this is binary. So that's 20% roughly the questions people ask that are finance-based, 80% or more in the preference-based. And we got to get back to what are you optimizing for? What are the trade-offs? Where can we find those resources without you relying on effort? So there's a lot of those sort of different conversations that we need to have.
Much like in business, much like how you guide your client, much like the advice you just gave about what are some rules to have when going about anything. I have a question about your personal life. You have completed 3 half Ironman triathlons. You are managing and running multiple successful business. You also have a fully thriving, loving family. What are some rules you have around your life as a family man and as an entrepreneur to be able to make sure these priorities are getting the attention you need without burning yourself out on either end?
So my mentor, Randy Massengale, he gave me this definition for discipline. And he said, discipline is being able to say yes to the following question. Would I be a disciple of myself? In other words, there's a camera following me around and I will watch that back. Is that someone who I would follow? And the painful thing is a lot of days I have to say no to that. Based off my behavior today, I was watching that person and knew all that. That wouldn't be the person who I would have as my leader. Step one is making it a regular practice to ask yourself, would I be a disciple of myself? And then the extent to which you say no, what do I have to do differently to get in alignment? So that's the front end answer to that question, because the second piece is that we make a lot of statements as humans that we contradict immediately. For example, we say, my family is the most important to me. Hold on, I'm getting a call from my client. Okay, yeah, I thought you just said there's no one I would rather spend more time with than my wife. But also, when is that mastermind where I can get away from my family completely for the weekend? And I'm not saying that I'm flawless at this. I'm on my phone way too much. I can give you a litany of things that I know I could be doing better. But back to that discipline and trying to identify, where are we saying things that our actions don't line up with? It's called espouse values versus values in action. I say the family is first, but my actions indicate that business is actually first. What that looks like for me is there are occasional exceptions to this, but they've got to be acute scenarios, multiplier scenarios, or this is a business opportunity that's going to change our life, or there's a major problem I have to address right now that was going to put my family's livelihood at stake. Otherwise, I'm having breakfast with my kids every morning. I'm making their lunches. I am seeing them off to school Monday through Friday. I don't take meetings beforehand, unless it's a rare exception, or if I do, it's before everyone wakes up because I'm Pacific time. So that's a standard that I have set up my office in a way where my kids want to come here after school and on weekends. So there's a whole area for them where they make slime, artwork. They do all the things that I don't want them to do at home. They often want to come here and hang out. When I'm working, they want to be here and hang out, and they think that work is fun. We're getting time together and I'm trying to design my work environment in a way that is inclusive of my family. And then I say no to a lot of things. There's an event that I would really like to go to on Halloween out of state, but I'm not going to do it because I'm not willing to miss Halloween with my kids. Same thing has been with birthdays. I've had speaking opportunities. I had one person like, how much do we need to pay you? We can buy your kids a birthday present. I can't get back missing their birthday. So there is no number for me. It's high enough because I can't get back to that. And I think the last thing I'll say on that is back to that discipline and data. It's like your kids really want to hang out with you if you're lucky from 0 to teenager. 0 to 20. And once they get to that age, which fortunately we haven't gotten to yet, but my oldest daughter is on the doorsteps of 11 and a little bit of preteen stuff going on, is they're not going to want to hang out with me as much anymore, or maybe at all, because they want to hang out with their friends. And there is no infinite time on this. It's like the clock is ticking. I can do work later. So
doing the work that you do, and also in general, in order to be successful, focus is another very important thing. There is discipline and then there is focus. How do you go about your day so that when you're with your kids, you're just focusing on them, which makes sense. You're taking the phone away, all the input parameters that could take you time away from your kids, you're killing them off. But when you're working, because there's so many things happening, how do you focus on one specific task and not get distracted?
not well. I think it was, I'm trying to think of his name, the guy who wrote Deep Learning and a book called A World Without Email. Cal Newport is his name. It took me a moment. And he talked about the idea that the skill that we have to develop in modern times is the ability to refocus. So there's focus and then there's refocus. And I am not good at focusing because I got too many alerts going off between Teams, Slack, email, and I have a susceptibility to getting addicted to anxiety work. Book called The Messy Middle, and they talk about this anxiety work. It's just constantly checking things. And I know that one of my weaknesses is I'm highly susceptible to being addicted to these little notifications and stuff. So I got to constantly refocus and eliminate those things. And then they build back up. I'm disciplined for a while and they build back up. So I don't think I'm good at focus. I think that I'm better than most at refocus, which is, okay, I got distracted. Let me get back on track as quickly as possible. And that requires principles, asking that disciplined question to myself, being radically transparent about my flaws to myself and to others, except for my wife. I tell her, I just want you to tell me that I'm awesome. Everyone else tells me all my flaws. Could you just tell me that I'm awesome? Yeah, sometimes she's to that. That's spouse dynamic. And I'm never going to say yes to that binding contract. But yeah, it's the refocus where I'm putting my energy, knowing that there are too many stimuli, internal and external, for me to stay focused.
Dan, you have had so many accolades. You have worked at such prestigious places. You have built such successful businesses, performed at high peak performance levels of athleticism. It would be very easy for you to go about life and really peacock around,
Mhm.
which almost always happens in social media, where people who are successful go about and almost present themselves like a god. But
Mhm.
I think what makes you uniquely different is that while you have so much success in all these areas of life, at your core, you are still a humble human being that is aware of the fact that he has flaws and is constantly working at it and trying to be better just like everybody else. And I think there is something to be said about a person like that because that makes you uniquely different. You have a great bestseller book and you have amazing services. And for those who are listening to this, obviously work with Dan to be able to avail of the services he has and the knowledge he has to give. And I think the fact that you are also a uniquely different person outside of all this financial success makes you a true leader in life. And I really am honored to have you on the show to get a peek into your mind on how you operate and how you do things and how you go about things. A truly a peak performer in every sense of the word. Thank you for being on the show. Any last words for the audience members?
That was a really touching way that you were wrapping up the show here. And I really appreciate those kind words. And I really appreciate quality of the questions and the level of introspection from you today. It's very genuine and appreciated. So sincerely, thank you for having me on.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mark.